What up, Shawnee? How are you, man?
Evening, Luke. How are you?
Good, man. Busy day.
Yes.
Been driving all around Sydney, picking up bits and pieces for jobs I've got to do. We've got a lot of I've got leather work coming up and DJing gigs coming up.
Yes.
So pottering around. How about yourself, man?
Busy.
Busy. Yeah.
Lots of jobs.
So, Shawnee, this is Box of Beauty, aka what's your other name?
Oh, well, the company's Infinite Stickers because we print stickers primarily, but we do.
Shirts.
Yeah, the garments is what we keep growing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've been
Shirts, man. Shawnee B designed this
Yeah.
and printed.
love Grogudas.
Grogudas, as worn by Jeff.
Here
Special
is
Jeff. Seeing as this is our first recording with video,
Yes.
we thought we'd bring in a special guest and bring
That's
in
right.
Jeff. So Jeff's just going to ride security with his Grogudas sticker on.
Little decal.
All right, so we had fun talking last time. We talked a bit about my background.
It was.
How about we talk about education on One Fat Teacher?
Yeah.
So let's talk about...
We talked about the one fat guy.
Yes, absolutely.
Now it's the teacher.
Now it's the teacher. So, all right, where shall we start? What would you like to know?
Well, you went to uni, obviously, to get your teaching degree.
Yeah.
Clearly, a lot of this, desire to be a teacher started there. Well, it started before it, but what I mean is the movement into teaching. Sometimes people go to uni for different reasons and then come out.
Well, as I said last time, I did 2 years of a science degree doing marine biology and just
That's
hated
right.
it and dropped out. And then when I was 23, I went back and started doing a BA, Bachelor of Arts, through Macquarie Uni, doing it all externally. So, and this is back in the day where when I first started, they would send you cassette tapes of the lectures and you would have to sit there with your Walkman and your notepad, and like I'd have days where I'd have to sit there for 12 hours and just listen to 12 hours of lectures and that sort of thing.
There was not pre-internet. It was just
the internet
was too clunky for that sort of thing.
Correct. Yeah. So I started there. What did I say? What year was it? I was 23. So what year would that be? 75, 98. Yeah, 98.
98.
Started in 98, and this is when I was doing, this was the uni I was doing when I was working the 2 to 3 jobs. But I was really lucky because normally you do a uni degree over 3 years, right? And there's always some awesome subjects, and then there's always some crappy subjects. Mm-hmm. And generally, because of that 3-year time limit, you have to be able to you just have to do crappy subjects as well. But because it took me 10 years to do mine, I could sit and wait. I got the whole 10 years worth of subjects that were upcoming and sort of got to do really fun ones. And I wanted to be a teacher, but I wanted to use pop culture, obviously, because I'm a nerd. So I was really lucky in that I got to basically major in anything that had to do with pop culture. I wrote essays on Dune as a fictional world history, and I did one of the first lesbian kiss on American television was Buffy between Willow and Tara. Mm-hmm. So I did a whole one on that, on feminism through pop culture, and it was really good fun. I did one on Bollywood films, but I did mine on the Indian diaspora and looking at how when people think of Indian film, they think of the real sort of Bhangra music and the dancing and all that. And there's this whole really rich, because Indians have moved all over the world. Every country in the world has an Indian culture, and because that interacts with different cultures, each Indian culture brings out these films that are fascinating because they're obviously Indian, but they're all different because of the culture that they're influenced by. And so I did all of that because I wanted to be a behavioural teacher. That was my original aim, just because I know what I'm doing. You know, I've got lots of real world experience. Like working in nightclubs is the same as dealing with drunken adults are just basically like normal teenagers, you know, so had a lot of experience in that. And I realised because I was going to be teaching a lot of the lower end, I wanted to be able to, a lot of these kids don't read. Like I'm not going to mention schools I worked in, but I tended to go for low socioeconomic schools. I wanted to work with like genuine welfare, you know, like one of the schools I was at, I was mentoring 26 different kids, and I was working really closely with the Aboriginal education team there, and so what I wanted to do was to go in and actually, because these kids don't read, there's no, how can I explain it? The more you read, the greater the skill you get. So if you don't read, you don't have skills that people who can read take for granted.
Yes.
Like you haven't even reached the critical thinking stage of reading. You're still at a reading level where you're stumbling over words and that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so what I wanted to do was, because they're visual learners, they've all grown up watching TV and video games and all that, work on doing units that would use graphic novels and film, because context, because they can't read. Their visual media muscle is strong, but their textual muscle is weak. So what we can do is, if we can introduce the IDs they need to learn, everything I taught was absolutely within. Oh, look! I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Uni. Yeah. So took me 10 years to get my degree. Then I got a BA. Then I did a 2-year Bachelor of Teaching in 1 year, which was full on. We started January 16th, and the course started and it finished on December 16th, basically. And every day, 5 days a week, we're doing 6-week prac blocks, that sort of thing. Really good fun. Went through with a really cool crew of people. Funnily enough, just about all of them aren't teaching now. So we all graduated in 2009.
Right.
And as far as I know, there's one person still teaching that I know of. There may be a couple that have slipped through the gaps, but there were only 12 of us in our course. We were quite a small course. And so we did all the uni, and the B-Teach was horrendous because it was all just box ticking. These are all the things we need to people. This is like, you learn how to write a lesson plan and that sort of stuff, but it was a lot of box ticking, so that when we came out the other side, you're not actually prepared for the job. It's one of those jobs you actually don't start learning until the metal meets the meat. Yeah, you know what I mean?
That's it.
So did that. That was fun. That was when my girlfriend was pregnant with our daughter, and she was a diabetic, and that was all. They were in and out of hospital, and it was chaos. And I came out the other side, and I started teaching, and I sort of thought, today, let's have a look at like, talk about my experience first of all, but look at the larger landscape that kids are working through now. Like, I finished teaching in 2014. In that intervening 8 years, it's a completely different landscape. So I thought it'd be interesting to talk about that.
Yeah, and your perspective is it's mixed with public and private. You've done some private too, haven't you?
A little bit. I did my first prac. When I was doing my pracs, I asked our casual bookers to put me in a rough school. Like that's what I want to work in. Put me straight in, and they put me in for a rough school down in Sydney, one of the few rough schools on the North Shore. And I got all excited, and I had to drive all the way to Balmain from the Central Coast every day, and I get down there and I walk in, and I go, I'm here for my first day of prac, first time I've ever been in a school in a teaching situation. Oh, your person's not in today. She had the day off. And I'm like, okay. They said, look, just shadow us and we'll find you something to do. Next day, the woman comes in and goes, hi, I'm Mrs. So-and-so. I can't take this anymore. I quit. I handed in my keys 15 minutes ago. I'm really sorry to do this to you, but I can't handle it anymore.
This was the one that was to show you the ropes, give you
This is so when you're teaching, you do two, or with us, I don't know what it's like because I didn't do an integrated arts and teaching degree, so I did the arts degree first and not that. And we did 2 6-week straight blocks in the year. And so I ring my uni and go, I can't do my prac. And they're like, what have you done? And I'm like, no, my teacher just quit. I haven't got anyone looking over me. So as a favour, they hooked me up with a really nice private school on the Central Coast. That was really eye-opening because that was the exact opposite of what I was planning to do. Like, I had to cover all the ink. Like, if you know me, I'm covered in tattoos. They're nothing gross. Like, they're all nerdy cartoon characters and Mr. Miyagi. Like, it's not anything but a very conservative school. I had piercings and had to take out all the piercings. And it was quite an interesting...
And we're talking 10 plus, just over 10 years ago.
Yeah, more, nearly 15.
Okay.
Now, 13, 14 years.
Which was kind of on the cusp of when everything, like piercings and
it was just slightly before it was cool.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like I've had ink since I got my first sleeve when I was 24, I think. And back then, Shannon, lovely guy, runs STR Tattoos over at Tuggerah. Spent 2 hours trying to talk me out of it because it's like, you don't understand, people will judge you. And I'm like, man, I'm cool with that. Yeah. He goes, have you? And I'm like, no, it's cool. Yeah. Like, I've thought about it. This is a conscious decision. Right. And that was a really interesting teaching experience because...
You didn't rebel on the idea of having to cover up? Or
no, look, man,
you just wanted to get on with the job?
It doesn't bother me. Yeah. You know, like, my tattoos aren't a statement. It's something I've done for me that I do. Yeah. I collect art. I also collect body art.
It's not for their benefit.
No, it's just for mine. It's cool, man. Like, I'm no one special. You know, there's rules and regulations, and you follow the rules and regulations, which is cool. But it was a really funny teaching experience because people are paying a lot of money for their kids to go to that school. And so it's a school that's very much aimed at producing good TER marks. Like, it's very much one of those schools that is like, that's what you're paying the money for. You know what I mean? For an education that will get them ready generally for more of a corporate type of world.
Were you for special needs kids there?
No. This was all, man, these kids were all gifted and talented. I actually got a gifted and talented class. It was actually really good fun. I was primarily doing English again with a little bit of history. I was one of the first people. I created a whole unit teaching V for Vendetta as an appropriation of 1984 and did a study of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Do you remember that really dodgy film? Sean Connery as Alan Quatermain.
It was a bit of a star-spangled cast.
It was so the original books were done, like, it was originally about all of the classic heroes from literature. So there's the Harkness, the girl from Dracula. There was Sherlock Holmes. There was Alan Quatermain, who was basically what Indiana Jones was based on.
That's right.
And the first episode, or the first comic series of that, there's an old book called The Murders on the Rue Morgue, and it's this whole, spoilers, the book's been out for 300 years. It's a detective mystery where someone's been killed in this room. There's a lock of red hair there. It was done with extraordinary strength, and there was no way they could have escaped. And eventually you follow the clues all the way through, and it turns out that the killer was an escaped orangutan.
Right.
So this one, it told the same story, but instead of an orangutan, it was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yeah.
That's how he joined the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Yeah.
And so I was doing all of this really way out stuff, and it was working really well, but it was really interesting teaching there because that school is producing a product, so the kids have a certain way of learning, and it was really interesting. Kids were used to being given answers. They weren't used to giving answers. So it was quite an interesting teaching thing for me because I saw Dead Poets Society when I was 13, and I went, I'm going to be Robin Williams. I'm one of those sort of teachers. I'll try and entertain as well as teach.
Yeah.
Getting critical thinking going.
Yeah.
That was really challenging. And then the second school I worked at was low socioeconomic, full on fenced in.
Yeah. So in your time at the upper socioeconomic
school,
you still yearn to deal with and work in those areas
absolutely, because
you're interested in that.
I feel my skill set would look, if I'm going to put work into kids, I'd rather put work into kids that don't have a chance because they're the ones that you see the biggest growth in. Like it's as I said last time, the reason I became a teacher is because I had a rough childhood and no one saw it.
Yeah, well, that was my next question. Is it's related to your empathy for the psychopathy in society.
Yep.
That the kids are suffering from.
Yeah.
I mean, they're victims of it.
Yeah.
It's not like they're in any way responsible.
Dude, it's been really interesting because I did all of my teaching pre-COVID and then the business. So, like, I worked in one school for 4 years. that was where I had a lot of my challenges because we had an old school principal and I called him dude and rocked around in sneakers and T-shirts with tattoos.
And he never really got it.
Just didn't get who I was. Like he didn't see the teacher I was because he couldn't look past who I was.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? You know, like, don't get me wrong, when I was teaching, I was also still DJing now and then. Like I'd say to the kids, don't annoy me on a Friday morning because I've DJed and have had 2 hours sleep. You know, still did my job. It's fine. I've been working long hours for years. But it's been really interesting because now with the Suns, I've also taught outside of the system, but because we work with schools and stuff, I'm still getting that look inside, you know. So that's why I thought this would be really interesting to talk about. Like I was thinking we should call this, what's the, you know, Helen Lovejoy from The Simpsons. There's one of those ones, won't anyone think of the children? That's what I want to call this. And just because people are freaking out about kids at the moment. So I thought it'd be interesting to talk about the school system, how it works, you know, what it's like to work in the system to understand what's coming out the other side.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the school system is a big concept because it's not just curriculum, it's structure, like the actual way the schools are run. You know, obviously there's the qualifications and the way that teachers are trained and their you know, outputs from universities, different universities, etc. It's a big question as to what gets into kids' heads because obviously time changes and culture changes, so society changes as well, and then they have to keep up with providing for those kids and their future. And you always get the arguments from people like, oh, why do I have to learn algebra or this or that? Yeah. And, you know, the biggest thing that people complain about is the stuff they don't get when they get later on in life. It's like, why wasn't I taught everything to know about mortgages or?
But you see, it's the actual style of teaching. It's it's the type of facility it is, right? Yeah. So it's based on the old school Prussian model, which was to teach people to work in factories. So you have to be here at a certain time. You have to wear certain clothes. You have to do this. You have to do that, right? Which is cool when you're in baby industrial society and, you know, time as a concept didn't really affect the whole world until people had to be somewhere at some time. Yes. On a farm, you get up with the sun, you work while the sun's up, you go to sleep when the sun goes down. And so that they had to teach a bunch of peasants, like people that had worked, you know, when industrialisation happened, all the workers migrated from the country to the city and started. But you have to... We take it all for granted today, but they had to teach them time. They had to teach them that you have to keep a uniform clean, you know. So that's why schools are so bent on making sure you're wearing right uniform and you have to be here at this time, and when the bell goes, you move here. And that system was created in the 1850s when our, you know, nearly 200 years or 150 years past that. And especially with the growth in technology and stuff, it's been really because... When I was teaching was when they were trying to integrate technology into the classrooms. And what they did was, instead of making the technology what you learn about, they'd go, well, look, if they go on the internet and research the Holocaust, that's ticking that because they're using technology to learn. So they're not actually learning about technology. They're just learning, the things they're doing are justifications to tick a box in the curriculum, because the problem is, you see, it's so massive. There's problems with the bulkiness of curriculum. There's staffing levels. There's pandemic. There's mental health, you know. So when I started teaching 2009, 2010, somewhere around there. And the system was very old school, like a lot, like the age of a lot of the principals was in that 50, 60 sort of range. So they were the guys that essentially taught us when we were at school. So they were very old school, and kids need to be seen and not heard. And, and, you know, back when we were kids, they always had the threat of the cane. Did you ever get the cane?
I got the ruler a few times, and I was threatened with the cane many times. Yep. But I was one that somehow managed to avoid the cane. I don't know how, because I was pretty... disruptive.
So when I was in about year 8, it was when I was getting Jack and Mum stuff. I remember one day there was a teacher, and she was old. When we were at school, she was in her 70s, right? So she would be well gone by now. And she really annoyed me. She was old school. We're doing algebra on the board, you know. And so I had to hand out a test, and I wrote, "She's a bitch," backwards on a rubber stamp, and stamped them as I was handing them out, and I got found out. And our principal was 5'4", and he goes, "Right, okay, you're getting the cane." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's fine." So guess what I did? Put my hands up in the air. That ended up being a brutal one, that one. I had a physics teacher who had a box of chalk, right? Yep. And all the chalk were broken up into 1-inch pieces. Yeah. And he'd be writing on the board. He would have been, again, in his 60s, old school. He'd be writing on the board, and if you talked, he would spin around in one motion, and just throw the chalk, scone every single person, fair between the eyes, spin around, pick up another piece of chalk, and keep writing. Wow. And there would be kids walking around the playground, and you could see who'd had missed a bad because they had chalk bindies in the middle of their foreheads. Right. Man, I don't know how he ever took out an eye, but that was that sort of era. But then we had all of these principles that had been in that era, and that era doesn't work anymore. You know, like the societal changes and the internet, and it was, you know, schools have become a bit of a vanity thing for a lot of principals, and they've got to make my school look good, and it was the connection between how the kids needed to be prepared for the world and what was actually happening was just slowly dividing more and more. Because these days, one of the first job questions you'll be asked when you go for a job is, can you think outside the box? And they've just come out of a school system that has spent 15 years trying to get them to fit into a box and think the same way and work the same way.
That's right.
And so there's this real disconnect, and it was really disheartening because as soon as you leave uni, you're put into a classroom, no support, you know, like there's no apprenticeship. They go, you've ticked all the boxes at uni, you can control 30 kids, Merry Christmas, off you go. I was lucky in that some people got a teaching mentor, and I got a really amazing one. Sam, she used to work at one of the schools, a couple of the schools up here. Amazing woman. I was lucky that I actually had someone that genuinely helped me, but it's not like you ever had a teacher sitting in your room giving you a critique afterwards. You know, because when you're new at a job, you're going to suck, you're going to make mistakes, you know, and the problem is because they don't have that mentorship, they didn't have that mentorship coming through, you were thrown straight in being expected to know all of the curriculums, how the computer system worked, what the behaviour policies were. Every 3 years, they would change the doctrinal philosophy they would use with the school. So just as you'd finish writing a whole series of successful programs, they go, well, it now has to be put in this system, right? Because they have to justify, they have to spend money to show they're improving the school, so that you're constantly reinventing the wheel. And that's not even taking into account the kids. That's just dealing with, you know, it was full on. Like, as I said, I was lucky. I went in when I was 34 and I'd been out in the world for many years and done a lot of things. But if I'd done that at 23, like, it was brutal, you know, like you're not taught, you're taught about Piaget's theories on teaching, but they don't show you how to manage a classroom and how to read a classroom and know signs to look for to know if there's any trouble. Like, none of that, all of that you had to learn on the job, and it was brutal. And
this is mixed amongst all of the social dilemma of bullying that's never gone away.
That was
right.
the cyberbullying.
Where that started to creep into that cyber side.
Oh, no, it was well in. It was well in when I was teaching. Right. It was, there's a little bug floating around. It was very much a case of these, like, beginnings of socials, you know. There was a lot of, like, sexting that was starting then as well, you know, like, and no one knew how to control it. No one knew what was going on. Kids didn't understand that if something goes up on this is the sort of stuff the conversations they should be sitting down at school. Anything you put on the web, no matter as a joke or whatever, will be there forever. kids don't understand
They don't get
that
it.
concept. I was lucky in that I did all of my stupid stuff before camera phones were around.
Yep.
And then by the time I was DJing and doing my uni and that, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. So I always made sure, like, there's the first thing kids would do if they found out I was a teacher is they'd look my name up, and the first thing that would come up is that I'm a DJ. And there's heaps of photos of me in nightclubs and in front of crowds, and so I always made sure I wasn't sleazy. You know, it's not like if I was ever drinking, it was an energy drink or a Coke. It's not like I'm sitting there with one of those helmets with a beer helmet. You know, nothing sleazy.
A beer bong.
Yeah, that's it. But nothing sleazy. But kids these days, they think it's funny to send to their mates a photo of them pulling a bong. Man, that stuff's there forever. You cannot get rid of it, you know. And again, the sexting thing was, I helped a couple of students through that, and it was brutal because every kid in the school got to see you naked. Like, that's ugly. And that was when the cops didn't know how to deal with it, and they were trying to crack down on it, and it was like wild.
Yeah, that's rough going.
Yeah, you know, so it was a very challenging time, and like it was. Look, I really enjoyed the teaching. Like, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, but there's an aspect to that as a teacher where they kind of handicap you in some respects too, don't they?
It's really funny. It's not handicapping. They just burying you in paperwork.
Right.
You know, like every teacher should make a individual learning plan for every student. That's 120 kids doing 5 units a year. Like, they expect you to do 700 individual learning plans every year. Then, because they change the type of format, they want all the programming in every 3 years. As soon as that comes in, you then have to spend 6 months reapplying it. The old one worked. Yeah. It was fine. It was good. But they needed to justify their job by going, look what I'm introducing to further the curriculum. You know, it's the problem I found with the system is that it's content focused. We want you to be able to regurgitate stuff, but you don't need to do that anymore. Everyone's got a phone in their pocket. You don't need to remember. How many phone numbers can you remember now?
Not many.
When we were kids, you would have a file of facts in your head of everyone's mum, their dad, the dog, right? That you don't need that in this world anymore. But by focusing that, they're not teaching them any useful skills. It's just ticking boxes and, you know, I mean, don't get me wrong, I had the added challenges of being in, you know, low socioeconomic, and then all of that, then you have the low socioeconomic and drug and alcohol and domestic violence, and, you know, it was just the system wasn't prepped for the kids, you know, and as I said, I lasted 6 years, and I spent my whole time at all the fights I had with everyone was advocating for students. Yeah. You know, I wasn't like, I need this. I'd be like, this is what my kids need. Can I do it? No, it's not part of the curriculum. But they need to know it. But it's not part of the curriculum. We don't have time. On the Harder Conversation podcast we did, I was saying then that you would sit there and everything you would ask would be denied because it's too much paperwork, or it's not right, or what do you know? And it's like, you know, like you've employed me as a teacher, and that means you need to trust I'm a professional. And if I'm telling you this is what I need to do, this is what my kids need. And there was a big thing they had called local schools, local decisions that happened I couldn't even tell you how long ago. It was a while ago. It had been in for a while when I was teaching. Where they decided, because the department used to make every decision for every school in the state, and what they did was central planning. And so what they did is they thought, look, what we need to do is give the principal the power to be able to work at a school level so everyone can adapt everything so it works at their school, which is a great idea. But the problem is these principals were being handed a $3-4 million business, hadn't been taught how to hire, fire, make decisions, run the books, deal with politics. Schools are very political, and I don't mean political as in, you know, gender identity and stuff. I mean political as in everyone's trying to move up in their career. Like, I was never going to be a head teacher. If I was still teaching, I would stay at the chalk face forever. I don't want to move
there's
up
people that want to move up the
as there is in any job. So,
right.
you know, there was a lot of that sort of politics and conflicting personalities, and a lot of them didn't have that training. So I was actually really funny. I was talking to a mate of mine up in Queensland that I know through Nova, who I found out today used to be a school teacher. Right. And I was like, dude, I said, how, you know, what were you? And he goes, I was art and visual arts and something else. I can't remember, computers, I think. And I was like, how long did you last? And he goes, 6 months. I said, why?
Wow.
And I said, because I spent 6 months full-time load as a casual, right? And the boss said, we're not hiring anyone soon, so he would have to keep working as a casual, no holiday pay.
Right.
I worked on contract for 4 years as a 35, 40-year-old man with a family and a mortgage and that. They would put me on one-term contracts and they wouldn't tell me if I had work the next term. And that was me working a full student load. So I had to basically say to my students at the end of every term, hopefully I'll see you next term. Because I was doing so much sort of welfare work and that, I got to know the kids. I was involved with their lives. I took kids to their grandparents' funerals. You know, I counselled kids after naked photos got shared around the school, all of the grunt work, you know. And you're operating with a guy that's only worried about the fact that the marks the kids are getting a low. And I'm like, but I'm working with the low kids. You can't make low kids get A's.
That's right.
He goes, why don't you give them A's? And I said, because they don't deserve A's. They deserve the grade they get depending on the effort they put in. And he's like, but that's making us look bad because the marks are low. And I'm like, but I'm not going to change. Like when I used to write reports, I would write 2 sets of reports. I would always, on principle, write a real report for each kid and submit it. And what I mean by a real report is schools generally, when they do reporting now, they don't truthfully report about. Like this is, don't get me wrong, this is not a conspiracy theory. No. What it is.
Actually, I was going to point out, like you're talking 15 years ago.
Yeah.
My kids are between 14 and 18. Mm-hmm. So this is the same era when my kids were going to school.
Yeah.
So I recall them getting put into the difficult kids' classes.
Yeah.
Because that boosted the marks for the class. Yep. Now, fortunately, the school we went to was a brilliant school.
Yeah.
It was a low socioeconomic area.
Yeah.
And traditionally, for much of its life, it was very bad.
Yeah.
It had a very bad reputation. But when they had started for a few years, it had already started to climb out of that.
Yeah.
And in the period that they were there, they, they were really, really top students. They were really, really good in the school. But I recall specifically seeing that. Now, not that I had any argument against it. Yeah. It was great.
Yeah.
It helped the kids, helped the school, but I could tell it was a kind of NAPLAN hack.
The NAPLAN.
Can I put it like that?
Yeah.
It's a hack, you know.
So NAPLAN's like a national program, and it happens in year 7 and year 9, and the whole point of NAPLAN is to give parents an indication of where their kid sits over the cohort of that year Australia-wide. That's the actual purpose of the report. But for a lot of principals, it became a status thing. You know, like we'll get more students because you've got to remember as well, they're running a business. Like they need, because if they get more students, they get more funding, they get more staff. So they're trying to recruit people. And it sounds bad. It makes it sound like a pyramid scheme, but it's just that's how they used that information. And it became, you know, the students you're teaching aren't going to help our cause with our NAPLAN. And I'm like, yeah, but this is not about NAPLAN. I'm saying to you, what used to happen is I would regularly have classes year 9 with a year 5, year 6 reading level. Like year 5. Year 6 is considered a functional reading. You can read the Telegraph, understand what's going on and function in society. And they would go, you need to prepare them for the year 9 NAPLAN. And I'm like, these kids are at a year 5 level. Throwing them year 9's just going to destroy them as kids. Let's use the 3 months that schools put towards getting good NAPLAN results, getting their basic skills up. Let's further them as students so they've got a better chance of functioning in society. Yeah. And that's not what the system's turned into. You know, it's a case of, it really killed me because I could see what the kids needed, but there was no, welfare is really important. You know, like when you're a teacher, you're not a content provider.
Yeah, I know.
You are there to help shape them into being functioning humans.
Yeah.
And that means, you've got to teach them to shut up when they need to shut up. That's a lesson everyone needs to learn. But at the same time, if a kid's saying something because they're excited and they think it's a great idea, I've seen many teachers go, look, I told you to shut up, as opposed to going, because if you don't know how to manage a room successfully, what can happen after a while if one goes off, the others go, hey, so it's riding that wave and, because kids crave discipline, it's got to be done in a loving way, right. But you can't, I'm not saying you need to bring back the cane, but there's no consequences for kids these days. Right. So that means that kids don't learn. It all boils down to reality, right? And what I mean by that is that when you're at school, the parents can't, or the teachers can't hit you, your parents can't hit you, which is fine. Like, I don't advocate hitting it anyway. No. Like, I'm not a fan of it myself, and I've never done it to my kid. But, the idea of if something happens, there's a consequence.
The capital punishment argument.
Right. No, it's not.
I'm on the same path as you, or the same, argument is I don't believe that people should have capital punishment. But as an option, there are obviously circumstances where if you've got like a young kid who just blatantly runs across the road, but it doesn't have the awareness to see the danger, a parent will strike out, and try to reprimand the child as a way of like trying to introduce a circumstance or
repercussions, man.
Yes.
It's because,
and that's a difficult thing for a teacher, because in the past, capital punishment was sort of like dished out, kind of, you just speak up at the wrong time. Okay, that's it. You're, ruler over the knuckles. Yeah. I had a teacher that used to give the ruler way too much. Yeah. And I was a disruptive kid. Like he was pretty cool though on some circumstances, because sometimes my disruption would make the class get into whatever we were doing, because I was a fairly gifted student. Yeah. But if I was bored, this is the problem that most kids have, is if I was bored, then I wasn't going to get involved. Yeah. And so I would be disruptive. Whereas he could sometimes redirect that. He was a decent teacher. So I always respected the fact that he gave me the knuckles. But it was more, sometimes, it was too often, too quick to resort to that. Now, that's not to say that it should be allowed.
But you'd learnt that if something happened, there was a consequence. It was very petty with a lot of teachers, right? Yes. But the thing is now, so when I was DJing, one of my guys I used to DJ, when I was DJing, T was my DJ bouncer. So everyone, generally in a nightclub, you have one bouncer, because the DJ box is always high, so it's the best place to see the room, so you always have one guard. And T was that one there, and we used to bet drinks, like, I'll shout you a drink if you could tell the people when they walked in who was going to get knocked out on the first night. You can see that dude, because you can mouth off at school and everything's funny and you go to detention. Yes. But if you're in Joe's garage in Gosford on a Saturday night where everyone's drunk and you mouth off to the wrong person, that's the first time they learn consequence. Yes. And so, it's the end of an era, and it hasn't kept up with the rapid change. Like, I know this sounds weird. I think the only way you can fix the hospital system and the school system is just burn it to the ground and restart it. Because everything's unfortunately been just latched on. Like, so imagine a stream of learning, and then computers come along. So they go, we're going to hook on, you research that on computer. And so everything, it's not all integrated. It's like this, it's like rolling a lolly across a very dirty floor, and it's just got all of these big chunks sticking off it. Yeah.
It's a ball of string that's way too entwined.
Oh, absolutely.
It'd take way longer to untwine it. Yeah. It's better to just cut the thing up and just tie it all back together.
That's it, and it's, the whole system needs to be reviewed for what society is today. And, sort of life skills that you need to teach people: how to work from home, how to have discipline. Like they're the skills that are needed in this current work environment. Gone are the days of doing a job. The system's set up to make you a company man who starts when or company person who starts there when you're 18. You work till 65 and get a gold watch.
Well, when you and I were kids, we're both 70s born. You were supposed to have a job for 10 years before you even went for a loan.
Now
you just need 3 payslips.
Yep. That's it, And
it doesn't mean that it's changed the landscape. In fact, everybody's still kicking on. I mean, the economy has its issues. We can go on about that on another time. But at the same time, it hasn't all fallen to pieces. But I was going to ask you too that there was your timing when you became a teacher was post GFC.
Correct. Yes.
And talking about, like you mentioned before, you've got principals that run schools. They're like a business.
No, they are absolutely because as a principal, you have to control the budget.
Yep.
Hiring and firing, I've done a lot of that over the years, and there's a skill in that. And the problem, they grew up in a system where the department made all the decisions.
Yes.
So they've never been taught how to make decisions like that. And then they're just gone, Merry Christmas, here's your school.
Yeah.
And they're not prepped for that. And,
That's right.
there's
a political aspect for the principal's position in a sense too, because they, I guess, it's like a stopping point or a stepping stone into the higher bureaucracy again for some.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that higher bureaucracy is that feeder, that centralised planning area, and like my point was going to be, and what your experience is of this is, we live in the West. In the West, centralised planning was always considered communistic, right? As if it was, part of the East. But at the same time, and Prussia, which was invented the school system, had that kind of, that notion. But it has its place. It works to a point. It has a sort of a discipline to it, right? Kids get up, they get ready, they go to school.
Absolutely. And they're vital skills.
They're vital skills.
But at the same time, the content is so heavy now that there's no time to actually teach kids how to deal with their emotions and how to understand. Like, one of the lessons I learned is Jocko Willenick, who's a Navy SEAL, he's a podcaster and author and stuff, has a saying that I've fallen in love with, which is discipline equals freedom, right? And I'm having this running battle with my daughter because she's 14 and a teenager. I keep saying to you, when you need to do something, just do it. Because the second it's done, you don't have to worry about it. And then you don't have that, all right, I'll do it in an hour. And then you get to an hour and I'm like, oh, I'm pretty comfy in bed. So then you start stressing yourself out because you've got to get it done and you haven't done it yet. And then your mum's yelling at you and then I'm yelling at her. And it's like, I'm just like, if you just do it, that saves all that stress. Overcome that little bit of laziness. Yep. And when I say do stuff, take out the rubbish. It's not. I'm not asking her to build the Berlin Wall.
That's right.
But just do it when it needs to be done. They're the sort of skills we need to be teaching kids. Like, one thing I found that was really interesting in teaching is that a lot of the teaching of general and basic skills have been passed on to schools as well. Like, we've talked about it before in relation to the society we're in now. All the parents have to work. There's no, they're not around. They're not home. Gone are the days where you had a mum at home. Most families can't afford to have one parent at home. So, they can't give that instruction. So that's being passed on to the school as well you're trying to teach. It's just, and it's producing these kids that just aren't built for reality.
Yes.
And it's bad, man. I've watched it for years, especially with special needs kids. Like, there's a big area I want to start highlighting, and we work with them quite a lot. Special needs kids from the age of 18 to 24, because they spend 18 years with perfect structure, and then they're put out into the world with zero structure. And they're kids that need structure.
Yes.
The suicide rates in that group is terrifying.
Yeah.
And the thing is, as more and more kids have special needs, and special needs just isn't, learning disabilities and stuff. That covers anxieties,
it's
depression,
also, it's
mental health.
It's the change in the approach as much as it's that they have special needs, yes, but it's more that they need a different approach to be dealt with in teaching.
Yeah, but it's... they need to learn different life skills.
Yeah, they've evolved compared to the past, because it's all dynamism, right? Look at how dynamic society is now.
Absolutely.
It changes so fast.
So quickly.
That's what.
Look at AI. AI's been going for
a year or two?
No, not even. It's been well, public for about 4 or 5 months now.
Yeah, I know. But for a year or two, there was AI, and everyone was like, yeah, right.
But every 5 seconds now, like
Yes.
it started like
It's crazy.
Cyberdyne's coming.
Yes.
But
You and I
oh, dude,
because we're Terminator and full like sci-fi geeks. We know what's coming.
Yeah, I've seen the movie.
Anyway.
But and then I tell you what, we're going to have a break for 2 seconds and pause
let's
this.
have a break.
Yeah, cool. All right. So, being old men, we just thought we'd have a loo break and then locked ourselves out of Shawnee's factory bay. So we've just
I've never locked it when we've been inside.
I don't think I can hear you.
You can't hear me?
Can you hear you?
Yes.
Oh yeah, that's all right. And we locked ourselves out, so we've just had to drive back to Shawnee's place to get the key.
Oh well, we're here now.
Thankfully, I had my keys on me.
Yep.
So yeah, so I guess where do we start from there?
We were at
just talking about the challenges of the school system.
Yes, and the dynamism.
So to sum up, it wasn't from a teaching and professional experience. Loved the kids, but the system was not fun to work in, and I just got sick of fighting and dealing with bureaucracy and doing the paperwork isn't being done to further the students. The paperwork's being done to tick a box so that someone can say it's been done, and it was rugged, man. And this is obviously all pre-pandemic, so we have the problems of a school system that doesn't fit the brief anymore. The way technology's moved, a lot of the skills we're teaching, they need to be able to read and write, but it's, even writing isn't as important as it used to be. Everything, 98% of everything is typed these days, whether it be with fingers, like even having keyboard skills. Like, you don't need to teach keyboard skills because kids have been using digital software, like you still have, some schools that are like, oh, we're going to get your typing speed up. Man, the kids can type fine. I watch the kids at work type on their phones and their thumbs are a blur, man.
I know. It's crazy.
And it's just been really interesting because, as I said, like I finished teaching in 2014, started the business 2015. And so I'm still getting this snapshot of schools and that. And then obviously the pandemic happened and the kids were locked down for, a year total.
Tell me your thoughts on that. Because
in relation to?
The way that they handled that and what they did with the kids. Like, obviously, no one had heard of Zoom until that. And then you had everything really went digital then. Yeah,
but it's not anyone's fault because we weren't prepared for this, right? But for kids, as I said, structure's everything. And so as soon as the lockdowns happened, kids lost massive chunks, 2 6-month periods. Especially, my daughter was in year 8, I guess. Well, actually, no, she's in year 9 now, maybe in year 7. It was actually, it was the beginning of year 7. That's the time when you teach kids how the school system works and lockers, because, kids have just come off, 7 or 8 years or 7 years being in the one classroom with the one teacher. It's a big change. And then you had, a lot of parents were working, so they weren't, I was lucky in that I'm a school teacher. So as soon as this happened, I set my daughter up and got a room right and made sure that she, woke up at the right time to be sitting in front of the computer and make sure she did her work. But I'm a trained teacher, so I can do that. And a lot of parents aren't and don't know how to and, don't know how to help their kids with their homework. A lot of schools don't set homework now anyway. So they're not learning those solo work skills. And, and there's the stress of the pandemic and people losing jobs and not making money. And, I know all of my friends in the entertainment industry just didn't make money for 2 years. I was so glad I wasn't DJing then, because when you're a DJ, you're your own business and you don't have sick pay. And,
that's right.
and all of these kids have just had this time where, and also a lot of homes wouldn't be pleasant to live in too. You know, a lot of families work because they're not there much.
Yep.
You know, like, don't get me wrong, I loved lockdown because I got to hang with my family. I'd spent, you know, more time in that house in the first 3 months of lockdown than the 6 years previous, because I've been running a business, you know. Right. And so you've had this huge shake up, and man, like, the teachers did the best they could, you know, like, they weren't prepared for that. The department didn't have anything in place. It was all made up on the fly, and everyone did the best they could. But now you look at the system now, it's just getting worse. Like, the kids, you know, a lot of kids ran feral for 2 years, you know. One of the schools up here lost, I think it was 40% of their students just never came back to school. Yep. You know, like, how are you going to get a kid that doesn't want to go to school anyway and then has 2 years of no school? They're not going back, you know, like, school in question. And the problem is losing that many students. All of your budgets and teaching levels and all of that are all set by how many students you have. So, you know, they had to fire a heap of really good people just because the students had disappeared, and the system hasn't, the kids haven't recovered, the system hasn't recovered. Like, the COVID period burned out so many teachers because you had to make up everything on the fly, and they're not trained for that either. And it's just, you turn around and look at the system now, and the kids that are coming out, they've all got depression and anxiety, and the reason they've got that anxiety is they haven't been prepared for the world. They don't, you know, like, one of the conversations I have a lot is about when we were kids. As soon as you turned 14 and 9 months, you could have walked into any Woolworths, Coles, Kmart. I used to work in a fruit shop. You know, there were all of these beginner entry-level jobs where that's where the kids would learn the having to do what you're told and all of that in the real world. They don't get to do that anymore. So they're being kicked out in the real world. They've got a job seeker crew down their neck to tell them to get a job, but then they can't get jobs because they don't have experience. And then even if they get the job, their heads cave in because they're not prepared for it, and the boss is expecting them to operate as a normal worker. And, you know, it's just, that's what I mean. You've got to burn the whole thing down, you know. And I speak to teachers now, as I said, because we do a lot of work with, the sons do a lot of work with schools and that sort of stuff. And I'm always sitting there with the teachers like, you know, what's the skinny? And, you know, the kids are being put even further back because all the baby boomers have retired now. Yes. And there's no one that's filling their place because the baby boomers were the biggest generation we've ever had and the biggest generation that will ever be. And then Gen Xers, like, how many kids do you have?
3.
You've got 3, I've got 1, you know, so we're not breeders. And so what's happened is there's not enough teachers in schools. Like, I regularly hear stories about 5 and 6 classes being stuck in the quadrangle to sit on their phones just because they don't have enough teachers to put enough kids in classrooms, and that puts more pressure on the teachers that's there, and that burns them out, and teachers aren't respected, and it's wild, man. And that's like, you know, everyone whinges about the kids these days, but we've done them no favours. Yeah. You know, absolutely. Like, they're just not ready, dude. Yep. You know, and that's like, I would be depressed too. Like, as I said, by the time I was 18, I'd been DJing for 3 years. I'd been working in fruit shops. I'd worked at Sheriff's Mini Cars. You know, I'd had all of these jobs. And I was sort of ready for the world. And these kids have got none of that.
I know.
It's you know, as a teacher, like, that's why, you know, I started the Sons, because there's all of these basic life skills that kids need to learn, you know, that, like, you know, Dennis Leary, you remember Dennis Leary, the guy that sang Arsehole? He has a quote that life sucks, get a helmet. And I love that quote because there's always going to be stuff in life you don't like. I've done a lot of very cool jobs, but as I said in the last one, I've done a lot of jobs, but a lot of them have had very sucky parts in them.
That's right.
And, you know, you've got to build that resilience to just go, you know, the kids have been brought up in an environment where they're encouraged to follow whatever they want to do without giving them the skills to do that. So you're not setting them up for anything. And it's just like I feel really sorry for the kids now, and like the system should be counselling at the moment, helping kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's lagging, that's for sure.
How are you finding your kids going through school?
One of my kids didn't like the idea of going back.
Yeah.
The others couldn't wait to go back.
Yeah.
So, it was sort of, and now he's doing just fine. Like he's actually kicking big goals.
Yeah.
So, there was a sort of, and let's not forget, like for us, it's like, that was just 2 years of what the hell.
Yeah.
But for them, that's 2 really formative years.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter what age a child is. Before 18, that's, every year is a long
and the government sold it as a scare campaign. So, there's a horrible thing lurking outside the door.
Yeah, they did all sorts of things. And, he's now kicking goals, so that's no issue. And the other 2 are great because they've got more focus on work.
Yeah.
So they are young workers. They got out early.
Yeah.
He's not as keen on that. He's more academic, but that's not to say he's just the reality's starting to slowly creep in.
Yeah, yeah.
Because there is costs associated with getting over 18.
Yeah. Well, look, I'd be really interested to hear it, any teachers that are listening to this, just because like you're braver people than I. Like, as I said, I was privileged. I got an opportunity to get out of the system relatively scot-free, But it's the system is just going to go down and down and down. It's in a death spiral now because why would you, like, no one's becoming a teacher anymore because it's a crap job. Everyone knows it's a crap job. It doesn't pay well, like considering you've got to have 2 degrees to be a school teacher.
Yeah.
When you see guys working, or you see the paddle pot people making $100,000 a year and you're forming the future of society and you're doing it all in a broken system and it's no support and it's really terrifying, man. Like, I'm sort of lucky that my kid's in the private system. So she's in a Catholic school. So, at least we're paying something.
Yeah.
And they've got the church behind them. So,
right.
Like
that's
they've
the same
stayed.
With my 3 in Catholic system.
Yeah. But I really despair because like we're in a period of extreme change at the moment and these kids aren't built to deal with change.
Yeah.
I think that's probably one of the things I notice the most is that everything's so uncertain now that any change is terrifying and terrible, but we're in the greatest period of flux since World War II.
Yeah, best of times, worst of times.
Yeah. I mean, like, don't get me wrong, we're in Australia, we're protected better than most, but because of the internet, at least when we were kids, everything was confined to our area. Maybe with a bit of news of something going on outside. With the internet, everything's on display, absolutely everything. And when you look at it that way, like, I've learned to just not care, but it's taken me 48 years to get to that point. But when you're a kid and you don't know what's going on and everything's doom and gloom and Russia's about to set off nukes and China's about to go off and, it's the education system is something that absolutely needs to be torched. It needs to be torched and it needs to be rebuilt from the ground up.
Yeah, I agree there. It definitely needs to be rebuilt.
Yeah,
it's the troubling part is when it's needed to be burned down. Do you wait for a collapse? Does somebody deliberately burn it down? Does it get reinvented and then try to replace it?
Do you do it now when the kids are so damaged that completely shaken up the system? Like it's a hard question, but it's one that needs to be solved.
Well, you've heard of the fourth turning.
No?
Okay. So it's like every 4 generations you get this major change. And of course, we are in this fourth turning.
Yeah.
Especially with regard to the size of the baby boomer generation.
Yeah.
The difficulty for the newer generation teachers who are taking over from where they left off because they're retiring, the baby boomers, they'll have to reinvent it in their image, so to speak.
But with no help.
With no help.
Because the brain drains happened. They've all gone, and
that's where that burn down will kind of happen by itself, in a sense.
Yeah. But then if you let it go to the ground, how many more years of kids are we going to, damage?
Right.
Like it's.
Well, this is the difficulty now. We have systemic or and that's the point I was going to ask you about, what your thoughts were, because, you have central planning, which is the idea of the state providing money. And as we know, the state in Australia provides as much, sometimes it's argued more, for private schools.
Yeah, which is a shame.
Yeah, but when you talk about like numbers, like obviously that, there are arguments, academic arguments as to, well, we have to provide more because, the higher standards, etc., and private schools generally get the high. So, there's a lot of arguments around that. But at the end of the day, in my view, it's odd. In Australia, there's very little homeschooling.
Yeah.
There's not a culture of that.
Homeschooling,
not a broad culture. I should say.
No, you'd be surprised. Like it was a bit odd when I was teaching, but with all these kids with bullying and anxiety and stuff now, it's happening a lot more than you think, and it's not, the standard stereotypical I'm a crunchy mother that needs to protect my children. It's just the kid can't function at school anymore, so the only thing you can do is homeschool.
That's right, and the challenge that it faces is cost of living. Both parents need to work. Who's going to take it up? And now, of course, again, going back to the AI, is it going to be an AI system that suddenly has some way of helping or assisting in...
They're doing that in China at the moment. I was listening to a podcast the other day that was talking about it, that now they're actually looking at doing, what was it? It was AI-based learning, because then when it's AI, you can individualise learning.
The problem there, though, and this is sort of, circling back to what the podcast is about, you, as a teacher, have had a good place in the hearts of some of your students. Not all, because, you can't be the right teacher for everyone.
Yeah, but you see, the thing is, whether you have a good or bad experience with a teacher, at least it's face-to-face.
That's what I was saying.
Because of digital technology now, like, we've had big discussions here. It's been really interesting watching the turn towards small business now, because people are sick of dealing with automated, everyone's going, AI is going to ruin the world, but I think you'll find people...
There's a good aspect, but we can't take away the humanity.
We can't let it disassociate.
Yes.
Like people, like the pandemic, people didn't see other people. Like those poor people down in Melbourne didn't see anyone for 6 months.
Yeah.
Like I'm sort of lucky in that we'd all sit out on our balconies in the afternoon and, like we've got the space in the room and we'd all have drinks and talk over the balcony. We had a bit of thing like that. But if you're living by yourself and you have to be by yourself for 6 months, that's
rough.
Gnarly, dude.
It's rough.
And it's a conversation that we need to start having. Absolutely. Because if everyone keeps sticking their heads in the sand, we're going to lose a generation. Like we won't see the genuine effects for COVID for another 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Because those kids still have to come through the system, go out the other side.
That's right.
Hit the real world. There's going to be... The world doesn't need everything we've got now, because the generation it was serving is passing on.
Yeah.
They're moving on into retirement and all that sort of thing. So we're going to have to rebuild the world. We're going to have to find out what the world's like without the boomer generation, And if we don't prepare the kids, we're going to have to make leaders. We're going to have to make people that will go out there and go, right, the old system's broken, let's fix it. But if you're in a system like that, takes clear thinking and it takes problem solving, and we're not teaching that in schools. We're too busy trying to get kids to talk about a book through the spectrum of a journey. We need, that's what I mean. Like, we need to prepare. Kids are woefully unprepared today, on all fronts. And it just... we need to start talking about it.
That's right. Beyond that, anything else that you want to discuss about your teaching experience?
Respect teachers.
Mm.
You know, parents don't respect teachers because it's your fault little Johnny's not doing well. The kids don't respect them. The system doesn't respect them. Like I've had both times I got out of the system, I was absolutely thrown under a bus. Like not, I won't go into details, but both times I didn't lose my job because of I was a poor teacher or I needed to be disciplined because I wasn't doing something right. The first time I went was because the principal didn't like me and he'd been looking for a reason to get rid of me. And the reason he used to get rid of me was I was trying to help another teacher in a medical emergency and I was told that I was leaving my class unattended. Now, instead of being like, well, good on you, like they were in the library, there were 2 other teachers and a librarian there, and I went to check on this person, but that was his opportunity to strike. Second time, I was thrown into a classroom, unprepared, unsupported, no work, first time in a room in 9 years, in a high needs special ed, and I was given no handover. I worked the whole day, managed. I had a very interesting kid, and an incident happened because the school hadn't given me information that I legally should have gotten at the start of the day, and I was thrown under the bus so the school didn't get in trouble.
Yes.
Now, I'd done nothing wrong. I'd done my job extraordinarily well on the day because I teach special needs every day at work. That's it's fine. It's not like I did something wrong, but the list of things the school didn't do to put me into that room was the reason I was scrapped. And that's, you know, like, I mean, I was a good teacher and I've been burnt by that system twice in 10 years and badly. Like, I'm not a wilting flower, but, you know, like the second time I can't go back into the school system now because if anything had come from that was negative, that would reflect on my business.
Yeah.
And I can't risk my business because I'm doing really good work there.
Exactly.
I would love to be back in the school system and helping out, but the school system won't support you. They'll throw you under the bus, you know, and how are you going to keep teachers if, you know, this is actually a very depressing topic. Jeez. You know, it's just, but it needs to be talked about, man, because everyone's just whinging about the kids, but not looking at why and trying to fix it. And it needs to change, man.
Yeah.
So desperately.
It's a function of human existence having somebody, whether it's a parent or a teacher, provide for the future knowledge to the young. Yeah. And it's
not passing knowledge, it's preparation.
It's preparation.
It's preparation. Your job as a teacher and a parent is to prepare a viable human that will function and thrive in the world. Yeah. And it's just not happening, man.
Yeah. And that's the difficulty is, you know, it gets mixed up with so much, you know, economics, politics, and all of those things should always take a back seat to the fact that you've got to work in the interest of the child.
No one worries about the kid anymore. Yeah. Everyone's too worried about covering their tracks, building their career. And that's not the teacher's fault. That's how the system shapes them. You know, like, as I said last time, you can only push the rock up so many times before you can't do it anymore. And the more teachers they burn out, the worse the problem gets. That's what I mean about a death cycle now. Like, because if the job was hard before COVID, it's so hard now. And because there's not enough teachers, they're stressing out, burning out, and then they pull out, then there's less teachers, which causes more stress, which burns out. And I don't know how they... To get the teaching system back in place, that's 10 years worth of work now. Because you not only, first of all, you have to pay more money to make it worth putting up with the crap, you know, because everyone's underpaid teacher. Because the problem with teachers and nurses, because they're caring professions, they will always get the job done because, you know, at the end of the day, the patient needs their bum wiped and that kid still needs help. So,
that's right. And
it's been taken advantage of for years and it's just destroyed everything, you know. So they're going to have to, and it's not like even with nursing, at least you can get in nurses from other countries. We can't take teachers from Pakistan because you have to teach within context of where you live.
That's right.
You know, so they're going to have to Like, it's 10 years just to get teachers back up again. And what's going to happen for that 10 years?
That's right.
You know, and we just need to start talking about the problem now and recognizing it and stop, like, just step away from the crap and look at the reality of what's going on. Like I was saying the other day, I reckon they need to essentially cancel next year and do a whole year of psych and welfare and get all the kids, because they're not right. They've been through the trauma of, you know, the biggest change in history in the last, 75 years. They need help processing and getting back on track and, getting them back in line. But everyone's just keep stumbling through and pass them out the other side, and then it's society's problem, but it's just going to get worse and worse. I'm so depressed now.
Well, that was where I was going to ask you to, like, obviously this second episode, we got into the teacher side.
Yeah.
It was a sort of exploration of some of the downs, some of the negatives, some of the difficulties.
Yep.
But the purpose for the podcast is to build up ideology and concepts about your experience and what can help people move forward, whether it's a teacher, a parent, or an individual. Obviously, I think that's your perspective too, because we have to sort of lay it out before we can, before you can build it back up.
Yeah, I mean, spend time with your kids. Like, it's very easy to get buried in the rat race.
Yep.
It's not about quantity, it's about quality. Actually be there with your kids. Look, man, we're just as guilty. It's been really cool at home. Like, my partner, because my daughter's a dancer, she's had to learn heaps of different hairstyles, and Halea's just started going, I want a different hairstyle every night. So her and Amanda get to sit there for an hour every night.
Yeah.
Because, of course, being a kid, she's the same as every other kid. She's straight in a room and, be kind to teachers.
Yeah.
I think that's...
You got to be understanding.
You got to be understanding, man. Like, it's all good to play, Monday quarterback and whinge and that. But when you're working in a system that's that broken, anyone that's still there should be absolutely celebrated.
Yeah.
I was talking to a teacher from one of the schools up here the other day, and he reckons he used to work in one of the roughest prisons out west, and he said school's getting like that now.
Yeah.
What else? Share, speak, interact.
Yeah.
That's what everyone needs at the moment. I don't know. It's really... I could probably talk about some of the positive experiences of teaching, but it's such a big problem. This is one of those ones where, look, this will be the one probably whingy podcast I'll do about it, but you have to lay it out first to understand what's happening, because most people don't understand, I mean, I love teaching. I still love teaching every day, It's something everyone should get into, because there's nothing better than seeing that burst of delight when someone learns something.
Oh, absolutely. I
or do something they didn't think they could do.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's really hard, because this is where we're at as a society at the moment. Like, it's not a fun time, and I think it's just as important to talk about that as much as being positive as well, because everything's like, don't get me wrong, we'll do fun podcasts and we'll, we may even put this out a bit later, but this is just something that I've had some conversations with teachers in the last few days that I really wanted to
get that out.
Help advocate for them and get people to think about it, because school's something you don't think about. It's somewhere you send your kids while you're at work, and it's something that we just really need to start putting some effort into. And I'm not saying teachers don't put effort into it, but everyone's just sort of been running on this same model forever. It's time to rebuild the model and
well, a lot of people just think it runs by itself, but people are there, teachers are there, having to slog it day in, day out.
Day in, day out.
And they need the support, they need the understanding, and the teachers themselves, the ones that are doing it tough, they need to reach out and find ways as well.
Absolutely.
And that's really the key problem is that, there's a lot of change coming.
Yeah.
A lot of change has occurred, but there's a lot more to come.
That's why, like with the Sun's philosophy, it's all about teaching people to learn, because we're we are now in a truly dynamic environment, and people need to be able to critically think and look at a situation, and it's where the cognitive awareness comes in. Watch what's actually happening as opposed to looking at what you think is happening.
Yeah.
You know, that's why we've started proselytizing this stuff, because it's just, I always knew it was needed, but now it's the conversation we've got, is because the problem is everyone does Are You OK Day once a year, and we really need to start working on ourselves, because the only true joy you get in life is from children, if you have them.
That's it.
And true joy, if you know yourself, is improving yourself, learning something, challenging yourself. People are so safe now. You've got to put yourself in dangerous areas. That's where and I don't mean you need to go walking down the cross at 2 in the morning with $300 in your hand. Yeah. But I just mean putting yourself into situations that make you uncomfortable and work to learn.
That's right. The discomfort.
Learn to, because discomfort lets you know you're on the right track. Does it hurt to lose weight? Yes. That's how you know you're moving, the discomfort. Discomfort is the most important thing, should be the most important thing in everyone's lives. But we live such a comfortable life now that people's ability to deal with discomfort is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. I reckon we wrap it up there.
Yeah, it was good. It's a good podcast. I mean, at the end of the day, I think you should go in chronological order, but at the same time, it's up to you. I think realistically, we've covered you. Now we've covered the teacher side. Yep. And now we can have some fun. We can go into all sorts of different stories and adventures. Yeah, right. Okay, what should we do next? What do you? I like the topic you were going to bring up, and maybe we'll talk about it next time. Yeah, right. Okay. Remember we had that idea? Yeah. Well, yeah. We'll have a bit of fun with that. Yeah, definitely. All right, we'll do that as the next one. Awesome. All right. Thanks, brother. No worries. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Luke. We'll catch you on the flip side. Have a good one. Cheers.